Today, we want to think about dreams, and particularly God's dream. And the interpretation of dreams is an interesting thing. In my training as a psychologist, we had a short period where we were trained in the interpretation of dreams. And some of you have had some training in spiritual dream interpretation, including myself. I don't know how many of you were there when Doug Addison came to the church on the hill, and we went and attended his classes. And then some of us did dream interpretation out on the streets on a weekly basis on Thursdays. I know Teresa and I did that for a long time anyway. She took the class. And I was going to show you that book by Doug Addison this morning, and I came and looked in my library and I couldn't find it. And then I remembered I think I loaned it to one of you, and I couldn't remember which one. So if you have Doug Addison's book, just remember, even though we're not under the Ten Commandments, the spiritual law also says, thou shalt not steal. So obviously I don't miss it too much because I didn't know it was gone until this morning. But anyway, when we talk about God's dream for us, there is a great book that you should read, and this is by Bill Johnson, one of our favorite authors, Dreaming with God. And it's all about God's dream for us and us entering into that dream, discovering that dream, and living out that dream. And every book by Bill Johnson is a jewel. So that's a good Christmas gift if you don't have it. And it's called Dreaming with God, Bill Johnson. What's that? I think it's at sale. It's certainly in almost any of the Christian bookstores. It's on Amazon. It's easy to get. So if you just Google Bill Johnson, you'll find it. And if you Google Doug Addison, you'll find his books on spiritual dream interpretation, which are also very good. But today we want to talk about birthing God's dream in our lives. And in this Christmas season of the year, I think the story in Luke is the best place to focus our attention. We're in Luke 1 today. And I want to make 3 points. Number one, we're never too old to become pregnant with God's dream. We're never too old or set in our ways to become pregnant with God's dream. You know, it's often said that the future of the church is its youth. And that's obviously true in many ways, that the youth are the next generation. But one of the problems in our church is we don't have too many youth. And that's a problem in many churches across America today. Fewer and fewer young people are going to church. And, I think that's sad. When I was a university chaplain, I was very concerned about this. I remember attending the General Conference in New Orleans and seeing that there were virtually no young delegates. Hundreds and hundreds of delegates, but no young people in that number. So I came back and I preached a sermon in our 3,000-member La Sierra church that went out over the radio that was called Millstone Madness. And it was all about how the young people have been discredited or they've been disenfranchised in the church. And the Bible says people who do that need a millstone put around their neck and dropped in the ocean. And the General Conference president didn't quite approve of that sermon. So he came and visited me personally on the campus and talked to me about that sermon, which I'll never forget. But it's also true that seniors are a great resource and blessing to the church. And we have a lot more of those. So, that's one reason they're a great blessing, is because we have more of them. The church is aging in America. But seniors also have experience. Many times they have time. If they're retired, they can do things that young people may not have time to do. And prayer is one of the biggest things that seniors can do. And that's really where our story starts this morning, Luke 1, verses 5 through 7. It tells us this was in the time of Herod, the genocidal king who tried to kill Jesus when he was just a baby. But Zechariah was a priest in the line of Abijah, and Elizabeth, his wife, was a descendant of Aaron. She even had it over her husband, because Aaron was the head honcho, So she was a descendant of Aaron, and he was only in the line of Abijah. So I don't know if they fought over this or, had any one-upmanship over this. They may not have been competitive at all, but my wife and I are both competitive, and we both came from families that were opposite. She came from a family of all girls, 3 daughters. I came from a family of all boys, 3 boys. And of course, men don't try to compete with women, but women like to compete with men, But But anyway, we have our competitions at times. Friendly competitions, of course. But we just had one recently. She usually gets the plane tickets when we're flying to different places. And you have to, if you fly Southwest, you have to get them an hour or exactly 24 hours before, or you're not going to get a decent seat, So unless you pay a bunch extra or something, but which we don't do. But she's right on top of that. But we were flying out at like 6:30 in the morning, and so she was saying, "Why don't you get the tickets in the morning?" And I was staying up late talking to my son till 1:30 at night, and I was not real thrilled with this idea of having to go on the computer at 6:30 in the morning and get these tickets. And I said, "Well, but you do that. You're retired, and I work a full job." And she said, "No, I work harder than you, even though I'm retired." And so anyway, I'm sure Zechariah and Elizabeth didn't go through any of this, but we do. Yeah, she got the tickets, but I was already up and out of bed studying, so she wouldn't make a bunch of noise and wake me up getting the tickets. But no, we have fun. But it says that they were both righteous. I get a kick out of this. They were both righteous, Elizabeth and Zechariah. And it says, blameless according to all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. Whoa, that's a pretty heavy statement. Blameless in accordance with all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. Now, how do you do that? Well, let's look at that a bit. It doesn't say here that they were blameless in all the commandments and regulations of the law. They weren't blameless under the law because there's only one person who's ever been blameless under the law, and that was Jesus Christ. If we say we have no sin, 1 John 1, 8 and 10, we deceive ourselves and we make God a liar. So there's never been a human being other than Jesus Christ who's ever been perfect or blameless or sinless under the law. And it doesn't say that they were blameless under the law. It says that they were blameless under the Lord, that they were righteous and blameless under the Lord. There's a big difference between being blameless under the law and being blameless under the Lord. I hope all of us here this morning are blameless under the Lord. That means we've received what He's done for us. As He is, so are we. When God looks at us in the judgment, He sees His perfect Son. Romans 4:3. Abraham believed God. This was even before the Old Covenant was around. And it was counted to him for righteousness. He transcended Old Covenant thinking. It was his relationship with God where he became blameless in the sight of the Lord and righteous before God. But we're told here in these same verses, Luke 1, 5-7, that they were old and that they were barren. They couldn't have children anymore. And, that's not a fun place to be for most people, to be old and to not have any children, especially in that day and age, because children were such an important thing. But even today, it's not fun to be old and not have any children. And I don't know what's worse. I have patients that I work with that are old and they have children, but their children have disowned them. I think that's worse. They're in a facility, their family doesn't visit them anymore, even though they have a family. But in this case, they had no children, and the Lord comes to them, and we read in Luke 1:13, the first words of the angel are, "Do not be afraid, your prayer has been heard." That's what the angel says to Zechariah. It was prayer that brought the nativity story to Zechariah and Elizabeth. They had been faithful prayer warriors for many years. They were great intercessors in the kingdom of God. And the world today says, life is short, play hard. But the kingdom says life is short, pray hard. That prayer accomplishes the things of the kingdom. And there's never been a great revival that hasn't been ushered in by prayer. When you study the history of revival, there are always prayer warriors, there are always intercessors that precede any great work or revival of God. And, there's really no exception to that. And that was the case with the coming of the Messiah, too. There were these great prayer warriors, Zechariah and Elizabeth, who the Lord points to. Tuesday night we were listening to Joseph Prince, and he was preaching about tongues. And I love that because I need to be reminded of the importance of tongues on a regular basis. After listening to that Tuesday night, I've been praying and singing in tongues while I'm driving rather than getting annoyed by the crazy drivers on the road. And we need continual reminders of these kinds of things. And tongues is a great way of interceding and praying for things that we don't even know need to be prayed for, and that we can be praying perfectly, without our human weakness entering into the picture. But verse 17, the angel goes on here, that this promised child, will come with the spirit of Elijah. Now, of course, they're talking about John the Baptist here that will be coming to Zechariah and Elizabeth. And that this child will come in the spirit of Elijah, turning the hearts of the parents to the children. That was the great Elijah message. And if you want to read a good book on the Elijah message today, John and Paula Samford have written a great book called The Elijah Task for Intercessors Today. And I encourage you to check it out if you haven't heard of it or read it before. But basically, the Elijah message was something that every Jew was very familiar with. It was the very last verse of their Bible. All they had was the Old Testament, of course. So Malachi 4:6 was this great promise of the coming Elijah, that Elijah would return and he would heal the generation gap. There's always a generation gap, and that gap's obvious today in this last election. There was a huge generation gap between how young people voted and how older people voted in the United States. So we need a bit of that healing right now in our nation. But, Malachi 4:6 was a text that every Jew was familiar with, the last text of their Bible, the last great promise that they were anticipating. And the angel's telling Zechariah and Elizabeth that promise is now going to be fulfilled through you. You're going to have the child who is the forerunner of the Messiah, who is going to make ready a people for the Lord, for their God. And so this is like an overwhelming thing that the angel is telling Zechariah. And of course, Jesus came right out and said in Matthew 11, verse 14, that John the Baptist was the fulfillment of this Elijah message. He was the Elijah. Jesus said, if you can handle this, he is the Elijah that is promised in Malachi 4:6. So this is an amazing prophecy that's being fulfilled through Zechariah and Elizabeth. And again, it underlines that we're never too old or set in our ways to become pregnant with God's dream. And that's a good thing for us here, because many of us are getting older. I think all of us are getting older. And I don't know if I found the fountain of youth like Roger did, so I'm looking for it. But in the meantime, as we're getting older, we're never too old to speak in tongues. Some people say, oh, I don't speak in tongues, so I'll never speak in tongues. No, um, God surprises us. And who knows what new thing God has for us as intercessors, speaking in tongues, um, seeing revival right here in our neighborhood, right here in our little church. All these things are things that tie in with Joel 2:28, that he will heal the generation gap by giving dreams. The old will dream dreams, the young will have visions. He will bring them together to prophesy and fulfill his purposes. So all of that's going on here with Zechariah and Elizabeth, and it's a pretty overwhelming thing. Point number 2, becoming pregnant with God's dream always involves risk. It always involves risk to become pregnant with God's dream in our lives. And you see here, the very first thing the angel says to Zechariah in verse 13 is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Why should he be afraid? Because people get freaked out about God talk. The moment they hear, hey, an angel spoke to me, God spoke to me, people start getting freaked out. And that's even more true in our secular age than it was back then. I get all these things from Claremont. It's one of the schools where I got one of my doctorates, and they're always asking me for money, which you can probably imagine if you graduated from any school. They're pretty good about following up and asking for money all the time. But I don't give Claremont much money. I've given them just a little bit. But one reason I don't give them much money is because they're always sending me stuff like this. The Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Lecture this year will be given by Anthony Pinn, author of his groundbreaking book, The End of God Talk, a humanist theology. We don't need God anymore. We don't need to talk about God anymore. That's what this book is. Spirituality has transcended God. We are gods now. It's a humanist theology celebrating how awesome human beings are. So you know what I had to put up with when I was at Claremont. It was not particularly pleasing, a lot of the things that I got taught and they tried to lay on us as students. But, it's pretty ridiculous to put God out of theology, to say, hey, the end of God talk, we're not going to talk about God anymore. It's only humanism that we're going to worship. I don't think so. But anyway, they don't get my money for that. But anyway, it is risky, to talk about having an encounter with God in this day and age. A lot of places, even theological schools, don't even want the name of God to be brought up. But when you talk about having an encounter with God, that will freak out a lot of people. And we talked about the study that, or the survey Gary did, and we had a very high percentage who've had an encounter with God and are willing to talk about that, which is very pleasing to me. But in the world today, it is risky to talk about having an encounter with God, or I've heard from God, or God has spoken to me, or an angel has spoken to me. You might get 51-50'd. People will think you might be a psych case or something if you do that. But what's even more risky is saying that you're pregnant with God's child. That's a little more risky. And that's what we see here in Luke 1:30 and 31. And once again, the message starts the same way. Don't be afraid. Now, I'm guessing that Mary may have even been a little more afraid than Gary was when he had his dream this week. And you might say, well, why? What did she have to be afraid about? The angel says, don't be afraid. You have found great favor with God. You're going to conceive a child in your womb through the Holy Spirit. You're going to bear God's own child, and you will call him Jesus. Emmanuel. What does Emmanuel mean? God with us. That's the Messiah, the messianic fulfillment of the prophecy. So why would she be afraid? Well, maybe it went something like this. Hey, Mary, I didn't know you were pregnant. When did you and Joseph get married? Well, we're not really married yet, and this isn't really Joseph's baby. Um, you might guess how that would have gone over in that day and age. Uh, Not that it would go over well today, but back then, that's like the death penalty. I mean, you just don't have something like that happen. And so she had a lot to be fearful about. You know, this was going to cost her a lot, not just her engagement, but reputation and all kinds of other things. So there's a good reason why she's told not to be afraid. And, when we look about God asking us to take these crazy kinds of risks, I think it's a logical question. Why, God? Why can't we just serve you and be happy and not have crazy stuff happen to us? But, when we read the Bible, we see crazy stuff is happening to God's people all the time. And the more we try to walk in the kingdom, the more we probably see crazy things happening to us. And, I have to say that I've had some crazy things happen to me. And usually they turn out okay eventually. But at the time, they can be very scary, especially if you're trying to raise a family and support a family and losing jobs. And all those kinds of things can be very, very scary. And I would say that the people that founded this nation were huge risk takers. These were people that left their home, left everything they had in Europe, left their culture, came to this crazy frontier with Indians and unknown things, and, had no idea if they could survive or not with the winters and all the stuff that they had to go through. And, they put together a constitution that was an amazing thing. I think the more we study that document, the more amazing we realize that document was, especially when we compare it to all other nations, when we compare it to history. It's a remarkable document. And it was really a document that tied very much to believing in God and depending on God. God is our source of life. He's our source of strength. He is the way we're going to survive. We don't survive on the back of government. That was never the intent of the forefathers and the people who founded this nation. And then we look at our culture today, and it's so different. Now we have people who have the idea that, the federal government owes us a living, it owes us health care, it owes us a cell phone, it owes us food stamps, it owes us a job. It even owes us a grant. If you're an academic, the taxpayers should pay for my grant. And that's going on all over the place in this nation today. I've just been reading a book by James Lankford. He's a senator from Oklahoma, called Federal Fumbles, Incredible Government Waste. And it's all about these grants that we're paying for with our tax money that are the most ridiculous grants you can possibly imagine. The fact that even people would even study these things is ridiculous. But then to have the government tax money paying for them, that even gets more outrageous. And just a few examples. A huge study that was done on whether children want their food to be sneezed on or not. And if they'll eat food that's been sneezed on, if they know it's been sneezed on. If someone wants to devote their life to that study, that's up to them. But to use our taxpayers' money to do that is pretty disconcerting. There's another one in the book about a feminist view of glaciation. And it's all about global warming and glaciers and how this ties to feminism, which is a real interesting attempt. But like $8 million in government grant of our tax money goes to a feminist study of glaciation. Just all this impractical stuff that you just can't believe. Our tax money is paying for. And this senator, has written this interesting book on it. But speaking of climate change, that was one of the things my son and I were having some interesting discussions about. Because the younger generation has basically been brainwashed into thinking that, hey, if you don't think global warming is man-made and that we're ruining our world, you're crazy. And the funny thing is there's more and more just recent studies coming out that show that land masses in this world are cooling, and they have been cooling for the last year, and it's all based on cycles. If you study global cycles, they're based on El Niños around the world, and in 2008, that was the beginning of a warming cycle of El Niños that ceased last year, and now all the land masses are going into a cooling cycle based on that ceasing, and that next year the seas will begin cooling because it takes them longer to cool because the El Niños warm the seas more than they do the land. And then now we're going into a season and a cycle of cooling now where everything's going to be cooling. So you see all these articles coming out now. Global warming alarmists. I'm sorry, but the Earth is cooling. And they just had a huge, the top scientists in the world meeting in Chicago where they confirmed these findings that now we're going into a cycle of cooling. So it's really, I'm not here to say we should be abusing the Earth or, the Bible says the Earth is the Lord's. We need to take care of it. We need to be concerned about environmental things as Christians. But the Bible also talks about not believing a lie. And there are a lot of political lies and a lot of things that are going on to make money for people that aren't founded in reality. And, I think it's important for us to study these things and try to understand them as best we can. But it's usually a pretty good principle to follow the money. Follow the money and you're going to see what's going on. Even with this recount on the election, Jill Stein is making a lot of money for her Green Party coming from donors from the Democratic that want the recount, so they're pouring all this money into the Green Party. So they're making all this money from it. And you can usually learn a lot of things by following the money. I have a patient right now who's engaged, and I'm not real thrilled about it because he's marrying this woman from Nigeria who he's never met before. And for some reason, she has all these emergencies where he has to keep sending her money. And, it's not a pretty picture. And his whole family's telling him, hey, this is a scam. You're getting ripped off. I'm trying to tell him that, but no, this woman wants to marry me. So you can learn a lot by following the money. But there's no money to follow in this case with Mary. She's certainly not making any money off it. This is certainly no scam with the baby Jesus. In fact, it costs her everything. It costs her engagement. It costs her reputation. So it's just the opposite of following the money. She has nothing. She's basically giving up everything. Which leads us to our third point. God chooses the most unlikely places to plant his dreams and to plant his seed. Here we have first these two old people that are sterile and on the way out that God chooses. And then we have, this poor unknown Jewish teenager who's engaged to a poor unknown Jewish carpenter. And the baby's born in a manger, which of course we have glamorized today with all the nativity scenes that people love to buy. But that was no glamorous thing to be born in a manger, to be born in a stinky stable. I was talking with my spiritual partner yesterday about how many mangers and stables were connected to the homes in that day and age. But that's unlikely in the case of the inn. Of course, the inn was no place to have a baby if you knew about those inns, especially that time of year with all the people coming. They wouldn't have a room to themselves. They wouldn't have any privacy. So having the stable cave actually gave them a little more privacy than they would have had in the inn anyway. But it's a stinky stable, you know. It's certainly not a sterile environment. It's certainly not a place where you want to be birthing a baby. And then, of course, the baby grows up in Nazareth. Nazareth. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Again, God chooses a city that has the worst of reputations. God likes to start at the bottom. That's the bottom line. He looks for people who are willing to give up everything for him. And that was the case with Mary. She was willing to give up everything for him. Luke 1, verse 38. Let's read it, see what it says. And Mary said, "Behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word." And the angel departed. So she knew what was coming. She knew how her reputation would be trashed. She knew what Joseph would think. She knew what was going to happen to her engagement. So let it be unto me according to what the Lord has said. Are you willing to give up everything for me? That's really what the angel was asking her. And she said yes. On April 9 of 1989, I've told some of you before that I had the craziest experience of my life, where the Lord actually took me up to the third heaven and asked me just one question: are you willing to give up everything for me? This was a very intense time spiritually in my life, where I was going through all kinds of stuff. And that was by far the most emotional experience I ever had in my life. As you know, I'm a Northern European, given to emotional constipation, and not easily emotional. But this was by far the most emotional experience I ever had in my life, because as I'm bowing there before the throne of God, I'm seeing what that would really mean: to lose everything, to lose your health, to lose your family, to lose your income, to lose your job, to lose your possessions, to have absolutely nothing. And that's a pretty overwhelming thing to actually experience. And very thankfully, the Lord did not take me up on that. He was very gracious and merciful to me, because I lost a couple jobs and had my reputation trashed in many ways in the process of that. But that's nothing, when I compare it to the blessings and what I've gained in terms of being in a free community that can celebrate and worship God through his perfect finished work, and to have a community of faith like you to share that with, and a family where we've just been incredibly blessed, as we got reminded of again this Thanksgiving. So, he never allows us to be tempted above what we're able to bear, 1 Corinthians 10:13. And I'm sure I would not have been able to bear losing everything. So I'm not even sure why he asked me the question, and I'm not even sure I answered it. All I can remember is this uncontrollable weeping, just this uncontrollable weeping. And my 10-year-old daughter was sitting there next to me in that little pickup, and she said, "What in the world is this?" And my 3-year-old son was in the back, and they didn't know what to think of this. But that was an experience I'll just never forget. And it doesn't even come close to comparing to what Mary had to go through. I just can't even imagine saying yes, knowing what she was going to be subjected to. Because women just had so few options in that culture. And to be a teenage woman where your whole identity is connected to this man who's proposed to you, he's given you this identity, and now you're going to spit in his face, because who's going to believe you're pregnant by God? I mean, come on. Even a good guy like Joseph couldn't believe that. So he walked away, and thankfully the Lord brought him back. But it's an amazing thing to see how God chooses the most unlikely places to plant his seed. And Mary was certainly one of those. And I think Kingdom Life Fellowship is one of those. We're living in a culture today where little isn't really respected much, and it's all about big. People always prefer big, the mega churches, churches on TV, all the services, all the options you have, all the programs for your kids, the Little League, and all the things that churches can offer people. And we've had, a lot of families come and go with kids, and the critical mass just isn't kind of there for them. So they'll move to another place, and you can't blame them for that. They want options for their children. But I think there are natural reasons why it's very difficult to grow a small church in a place like Southern California. The Sabbath is part of that, although our Sunday church isn't growing all that fast either. We have a few faithful ones that are awesome. But I was thinking there might be another reason, and that is having a huge sledgehammer by the door. That might not be the most inviting symbol to some people. But, the bottom line is that God prefers small. God prefers small when we read his word. He loves to choose those things that are despised and dismissed. He will even test and filter what is small. Wimber's church wasn't very big. It was about the size of ours. When God told him to call for healing every week for 11 months in a row without one person getting healed, and he lost more than half of the small congregation he had before God released the incredible blessing over the vineyard. And same with David Hogan. 4 years of not one single person getting healed before God raises this boy from the dead and releases this incredible ministry over him. So God's timing is everything, and we don't know what that timing is. 6 years is a lot longer than I thought it would be for us to grow and take off and fly. But, the other side of that coin is we're a small spiritual family, and we all know each other. And it's kind of neat to know everyone and to be a family. So I certainly am pleased and excited about that. But I want to be obedient to what God is calling us to. And right now he's called me to knock on all the doors. And I'm about 1/12 of the way through that. So there's still a long ways to go there. But, for all of us, I think all we can do is try to listen to the Spirit and be obedient to what the Spirit is calling us to do. And if we do that, we will truly be birthing God's dream. God bless you.